I am, Tom. I'm ready.
Okay.
And I was so happy when you called because I do not remember you from the time of your dad's funeral, but I'm happy to have you.
Well, introduce yourself first.
I'm Agnes Slater. I live in Plainview. I'm a widow. My husband died going on 17 years. So, and I'll get to the family history a little later.
Okay, so you live in Plainview.
I live in Plainview.
All right.
And Tom wanted to write up or a little piece that we could put together about the Feehan relationship. So I have tried. So this is the Feehan relationship history as much as I know.
Okay.
Starting with our grandparents. Was Mary Ann Hagan, and she married Dennis Feehan. There were two Feehans named Dennis at that time. One was called Big Denny, the other was Little Denny. And Little Denny was our grandfather. He was short and stocky, he had a mustache. I just remember that much about him.
Where did they get married?
And I think probably it would have been Plainview, but I'm not sure. And I believe I'm quite correct to say that our grandfather came from Ireland, because when I was a little girl, I can remember my mom telling about Ireland, and I think that he did. So from there, this couple, our grandparents, had 9 children. The 9 children were Fred, John, Andrew, Richard, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was always called Bessie. That was my mother. Veronica was always called Roni. Kathleen was always called Kitty. I can't imagine why they put all these nicknames, but as we grew up, we just knew them by their nicknames. Aunt Roni, Aunt Kitty, and so forth. And Frank. Now Fred, the oldest one, never married. And as I know, he spent most of his life in South Dakota and probably some in the North Dakota area. I don't know what caused him to drift off to Dakota, but he did. John was married to Frances Turney. This would be the grandparents of Tom. And Aunt Frances came from Ireland. That much I know. She used to keep house for Father Lavery, who was the priest at that time, and that's how we got to know her so well. Later then, she and Uncle Johnny got together somehow, met, I don't know where, and they were married.
That was pretty late in life, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. But they had 2 sons, John and James, and Tom that's here is the son of James. John had 8 children, and I wanted to get in touch with him to get his wife's maiden name, which I never knew, and I didn't, so I'm leaving it up to Tom to get information from his Uncle John. And James, of course, was Tom's son, and I don't know exactly how many children was in his family. 4, I believe. Okay. Andrew never married, and he died at about when he was middle age from a flu epidemic that was going around, which was real bad at the time. Aunt Bernie, as we always called her, Bernadette, married Tom Ellams. And they had 2 sons, Raymond, who now lives in Florida, and Denny, which was the younger of the 2, lives in Lake City, and he's married. I don't know too much about how many children Denny had. And Ray had just one daughter. And he just celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary, and we found it out through another cousin. So we floored him with anniversary cards, which he didn't know anything about. I received a letter afterwards, and he was so thrilled. He said it was the best part of their 50th wedding anniversary celebration. The next one that was born to that grandparents was Richard, and he died as an infant. I never knew him. Elizabeth Bessie, which is my mother, married Patrick Lyons in 1911. Now, they had 9 children, and I'm going to tell you who their children were. Gus, Agnes, who was me, Steve, Denny, Arthur, and Dorothy. Mother had 3 babies that died as infants. So altogether that made 9 of us. Now Gus, my oldest brother, married Mary Slater, and they have 3 daughters. Rita married Kenny Dunlinger. They have 2 sons, Jeremiah and Benji. The next one of their daughters, Lucille, married Dwayne Patro, and they had 4 children. Their 4 children are Jeff, Joe, Jimmy, and Jackie. Jeff is married, has 2 children, and Jeff married Michelle O'Flaherty. Joe is married, has 2 children. I don't know what his wife's maiden name was. Jimmy is married, they have no children, and I don't know what his wife's maiden name was. And Mary Lou, the 3rd daughter of Gus and Mary, is Terry. She married Terry Waltman. They have 3 children. And their children's names are Cindy, Scott, and Christine. Cindy married Richard Powers. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Scott is married and has 2 children. Christine is married to a fellow by the name of Fick, has no children. Agnes, second of Patrick and Bessie Lyons' family, was married to Joseph Slater, a brother to Gus's wife, Mary Slater. So we were very close. And our families are still very close. Double cousins in the families and so forth. And Agnes and Joe had 1 child, a daughter, Patricia Ann. Patricia married John Diedrich. They live out in the country about 7 miles from Plainview. I see her quite often. In fact, she was here this morning to just say hi before she went on to work. They had 7 children, so you see, I'm doubly blessed. And now they have 5 grandchildren, so I'm not only a grandma, but a great-grandma, 5 times. John and Patricia, their children. The oldest one is Stephanie. Their children were Stephanie, Marty, Chad, Marcy, Brian, Darren, and Jessica. Now I'll tell you a little bit about their history.
One question, Agnes. Where did Mary and Dennis have all these children? In Plainview?
As far Mary and Dennis.
Your grandparents, my...
I think they lived around in this locality.
I didn't know that. I thought they were from Indiana or something.
Oh, well, as far as I know, from what Mother used to say, they all seemed to be so close, so I just figured they were raised pretty close together, and I thought around here. But I may be wrong.
Do you know what they did, what Dennis did?
Well, I think probably it was farming, but I'm not sure about that. Denny and Mary, let me see. I'm not sure where they were buried, Something seems to tell me they were buried in Oakwood Cemetery, which is a cemetery out north of Plainview, and wasn't kept up very well, but a few years ago, a couple of girls that I knew who were older than I kind of got together and got them to straighten the cemetery up. But I think that's where they were buried. Now going back to John and Patricia, my daughter and son-in-law, their first one was Stephanie. She's married to Brian Ellenheisen. They have 2 daughters, Amanda and Josie. Stephanie works at First National Bank, and Brian is a builder. He's self-employed. Marty isn't married. Chad isn't married, but they're on their own. They have good jobs. Marcy is married to Michael Lee. They have 2 children, Desiree and little Martin. Then we have Brian. He's married to Amy, and I am sorry to say I don't remember what her maiden name was, but she was a girl from Dover. And they have 1 child, Sierra. Darren is not married. He's in his 3rd year of art college up in St. Paul. And Jessica is a senior in high school. So now we go on to the next one in the Pat and Bessie family, and that's Steve.
Pat and Mary.
Pat and Bessie.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's my, yeah.
All right.
And Steve was married to Helen Anderson. They lived up in St. Paul. They had no family. Steve died in 1972. Helen came home from work and found him at the bottom of the basement steps. We are not sure if he had a massive heart attack or if he had a stroke, but he had brain and head injuries and only lived 2 or 3 days. Arthur died when he was 17 years old from bronchial pneumonia. Now we go to the next one in our family, and that's my sister Dorothy. She was married to Dwayne Dose, and they had 7 children. Mary Ann died at birth. And Donald, they had David and Donald, who are twins. Dale, Diane, and Denise. And they had a baby named Joseph, and he died as an infant. Dwayne died this last February, and their little son Joseph is buried at West Albany, where they belong to St. Patrick's Parish, and their little daughter, Mary Ann, is buried in Plainview Cemetery. They lived south of Plainview on a farm at that time. David, Dorothy's and Dwayne's family, David, which is one of the twins, is married to Anne Marie Schell. They have 3 children, Molly, Adams, and Mitchell. Molly is in college now. Adam is a junior in high school, and Mitchell is in the 8th grade. Donald, the twin to David, was married to Diane Schmitz. They have 2 children, Gary and Teresa. I thought it might be interesting to relate that Gary has had 3 years of college at Creighton. He was always a great sport fan. In high school, I think he took up about every sport he could think of, but the one that he really enjoyed was baseball. The baseball twins happened to watch him one time when he was playing baseball in Rochester with the Royals, I think was the name of the little team they had that time. They were so taken up with his speed. He was catcher then, but as a batter and catcher. So they clocked him out different places where he played, and he was surprised when he was approached by one of the twin people that do this sort of thing came to his house in Potsdam, and they signed him up with the twins. So he hasn't finished his last year of college, but the twins will pay for his last year of college if he stays with them and he wants to go on. And so he's been with the twins, probably down in Florida most of the time, practicing. He was just home on vacation. I'm sorry to say I didn't see him, but believe me, I can't wait till he's chosen and we can see him on television at the place in the cities.
Metrodome.
Metrodome. Tom helped me with that. Okay. The next boy of Dorothy and Dwayne's is Dale. He's married to Joyce Ballmer. I thought it might be interesting to put this down. It's kind of a long, but Tom can go back and kind of cipher it out, I guess, maybe. I'm trying to make it clear. And Dale and his wife have 2 children, Sarah and Aaron. Sarah's in high school, first year, and Aaron is in the 5th grade. Now we go down to their daughter, Diane. She's married to Dennis Bloom. They have 4 children, and their names are Sage, Ben, Jacob, and Denise. Denise is not married. So, of course, she hasn't any family. And now, if I can just take a break.
A little bit now, how did, just so a sidestep here, but
Yeah.
how did Tierney, first name again?
Frances.
How did Frances get here? She was in Ireland and then?
Through a distant relative who I think the name was Nolan, helped to get her here. She wasn't here hardly any length of time when Father Lavery, which was a typical Irishman, was here, heard about her. He had no housekeeper at the time, and he approached her, and she went to work being Father Lavery's housekeeper. And she was a dearest person. I stayed with she and Uncle Johnny quite a few years when I worked at the canning factory here in Plainview. And we just loved her. So
Okay.
now I just finished the history of Patrick and Bessie's family, their grandchildren, and their children. Now I'm going on to Roni Feehan. That was Veronica. She married Edward Lyons. And mother, that was Mom and Dad, and Aunt Roni and Uncle Ed married brother and sister. And we had a repeat of that when I and my brother Gus each married a Slater. There were only 2 in their family, Donald and Mary. So now to Aunt Roni and Uncle Ed's family. Lyons, they were. They had 9 children. 2 died as infants. Their children were Paul, Elizabeth, Rachel, Matt, Raymond, Mark, Lawrence. Rachel lives about a house between me here in Plainview. We're back and forth all the time. We're great friends other than being first double cousins. Okay, now going back to their oldest son, who was Paul. He married Helen Tennis, and they had 4 children. Their children were James. He's married and has 3 children, and Deborah, Linda, and Cindy. Jim had open heart surgery at one time, but he seems to be in good health. Don't see him very often. The other son of Paul's he never married. The girl, his daughter Marianne, was the youngest. She married, and I don't know how many children she has. Elizabeth, the next one in Ed Lyons' family, married Joe McNallen. They had 4 children. Theirs was Gerald, Marlene, Lucille, and Joanne. Jerry is married Judith Balo. I thought you'd be interested if you wanted to check back further with any of them in the family history. That is the reason I put all of these down. And I think maybe after hearing this over, when Tom is by himself, he can cipher it out a little better. Okay, so Jerry was married to Judith Balo, and they had 6 children. Their children are Michael, Joe, Michelle, Wendy, Patricia, Jacqueline. Okay, the next one in Elizabeth's family is Marlene. She's married to Ron Schuweiler. They live in Kellogg. They have 3 children, Sherry, Chad, and Kevin. And their other girl, Lucille, is married to James Ager. They have 3 children, Missy, Brian, and Christopher. The last one, the youngest, Joanne, is married and has 1 son, and that son is going to college at Notre Dame.
And we're on.
The third one in Ed and Aunt Roni's family was Rachel. She married Dunn Houghton. They had 2 sons, John and James. Rachel lost Dunn. Well, I just can't remember the year he died. And about 10 or 12 years later, she married Alfred Mayer. She got a wonderful husband. Rachel's first son, John, was married to Janice Sheik, and they have 5 children. And their children's names are Diane, Donna, David, Dougie, and Debbie. I'd like to say that John is an auctioneer. He used to farm. He found farming wasn't successful for him, so he went to auctioneer school, and he's a very good one. Her son James died after he was married, well, for a little while, but they did have 1 son, and he was killed in a snowmobile accident. And now on to the next one. Matt is another one of Ed Line's family. He married Isla Irish. They have 5 children. Eddie is in Plainview here. He operates an oil station and has a sort of a quick trip store of his own. And his son, Michael, runs a tire and garage shop. And their children were Sandy, Richard, Patricia, and Teresa. Sandy lost her husband about 2 years ago with cancer. So the next one was Raymond. Raymond married Evelyn Clausen, and they had the following children: Christine, Cecilia, Raymond Jr., Gerald, and Marty. They're all married now. So going on then to the next one, Melissa and Susan. I can't recall what I was going to say here. So I'll go on to the next one. The next one was Mark Lines, who was born to Ed and Aunt Roni. Mark died in 1958. He married Mariel Schroeder. They had 3 children, Kathy, Michael, and Beth. The last one in their family was Lawrence. He married Vera Apple. They had quite a few children. They had Bob, Janice, Karen, Kenneth, Barbara, and a Donald. And I guess I haven't got their children's name. Now the next one of our grandparents was Kathleen. We always called her Aunt Kitty. She was married to Charlie Kruzmark. They had 2 children. Francis Kruzmark, he's dead now. Mary Agnes, who's living in Lake City. She was married, I don't remember her married name. And then we have Uncle Frank. He married Ida Schuchart. They had 2 sons, Donald and Vincent. Donald is married to Mary Ellen Shea. They have no family. Vincent is married to Marilyn Funk, and they have 3 children. I guess that's about as far as I went, Tom, with the family history.
Way more than expected, Agnes. Thank you.
Well,
Tell me a little bit about Francis and John. Right? Is it John?
Uncle Johnny,
Yeah.
named Francis.
Okay. I guess the big question, one of the questions, there's Feehans in Lake City and Wabasha. Now, are they in this clan here?
Well, in Lake City, yes, they'd be related to us, sure.
Okay.
They'd be all first cousins,
Okay.
yeah. And the one in Wabasha that you're referring to, I'm just not sure.
Okay, I thought there was some, but I don't know for sure.
Oh, uh-huh.
And tell me a little bit about Francis. I understand they married late now, didn't they?
They were married later in years, yes. They lived in Plainview after they got married, right back of the Catholic Church. They always stayed close to the church. They used to come out to our place many times on Sunday. But as John often told me, he remembered they were always late getting there, but we never expected them. We always had them for supper, because John and Jim were both altar boys. And at that time, which they don't carry out anymore, there was always the benediction service in the afternoon about 3. And John and James lived close and seemed like they were the handiest and always had to serve for that. So that's why they were always late getting to our place.
And what did John do?
Your grandpa, Uncle Johnny, he worked at different jobs, Tom. It was in the time of the Depression that I remember them mostly. Aunt Frances always worked at Lakeside, the canning factory here in Plainview.
While she was a housekeeper?
No,
Oh.
she was at home then. She was a homemaker at that time.
Okay.
And worked at Lakeside. Uncle Johnny worked at jobs whatever he could get at that time. It was during the time that I remember them so well, was Depression years.
So they married late, and I understand she had quite a travel bug.
Aunt Frances, she liked to travel, but I can't think that they ever went anywhere.
She went back to Ireland at least once, didn't she?
It seems to me she did. I can't, and her oldest son, their oldest son, John, I think he's made his 3rd trip to Ireland. Twice, we went once by himself, and then the other 2 times I think he took some of his family with him. He thoroughly enjoys it, never tires of talking about Ireland.
So we don't know what or when the Feehans came from Ireland. Exactly.
Aunt Frances, no.
Well, we know that side.
Yes. But going back to the grandparents, no, I can't comment on that.
But we think it's Dennis. We think Dennis came from Ireland.
Yes, that'd be our grandfather, my grandfather.
My great-grandfather.
And your great-grandfather.
Dennis Feehan.
Yeah.
And he came to Plainview, or we don't know? We don't know where he
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. I'm not sure. I would say he must have traveled in from some other place. Yes, but I'm not sure.
and met Mary here.
Yes, I would say so, because the Hagans, I'm sure, lived around this area most of the time.
John said Indiana, but I think that's what he was thinking. That
Well, I think he told me one time when he made a trip and was coming back through Indiana, he saw a big sign and he had gone past it and couldn't get off of the interstate close there, but he saw a sign, some business by the Feehans. And he was always sorry, and he don't remember just where that was, but I remember he said that, so he's kind of thinks that maybe some of them settled at one time somewhere in that
And we
area.
don't know why Dennis came here.
No, I don't. If it was for work or what, that I can't say.
So they married late.
Yes, they were married later in years, but they had the two sons, John and Jimmy.
I'm going to do something here. Age then next to my dad, Jim.
Well, they were much younger than we. I'm 82, will be 83 in February. John is in his high 60s, I think, probably, roughly, I would say 68. And I don't know how much younger your dad was than Brother John.
I think just 2-3 years.
I believe it was something like that.
So you knew him growing up?
Oh, yes, I knew them when they were growing up, and I remember them when they were altar boys. And they used to love to come to our place. We lived on a farm, Dad and Mom did. And Jim loved to go out and help my dad feed the pigs. I don't know why he was so interested at that job, but he loved to go out and watch them eat. I think they were kind of, I don't know, but Jim did like that.
Well, those two were different, Jim and John.
Yes,
like
they were.
night and day.
Yes, they were different personalities, different, well, they were just different.
I think of it as like a city guy and a country guy. I think John's the rural guy and
Yes.
Dad was the city guy.
A city guy. I think that's the way they eventually, but your dad went to school, and what did your dad, he went on to school.
He went to William Mitchell Law and
Yes.
got his law degree,
Yes,
but never took the bar.
he didn't.
I don't think so. I think that's the goofy thing about that.
Well, I know he used to come to Plainview, I think it was the drugstore one time, and it seems to me he checked their books for the manager sometime with accounting.
Okay.
It seems like I can remember that. And Jim was in the Navy, and I remember, maybe that's why he loved to come here, because he liked to talk to my husband, who has over 20 years in the Navy, and they used to talk Navy.
That was before he got in the Navy, or was it after?
Pardon?
Was that before my dad got in the Navy, or after, or both?
Oh, after.
Okay.
When we came back, my husband didn't retire till 59. So it was after they came back, and we lived in Plainview. Every time they'd come, Jim would usually make an appointment to try and stop here, and we were always so happy to have both he and John. And James was a great conversationalist, I remember that. And he knew, he had done quite a bit of traveling prior to that, and so he had wide knowledge of different areas, which was always interesting.
And he was somewhat of an athlete, although not a great one?
I think he was more so than John was, as I remember them, yes.
And a debater or a speaker, whatever.
Yes, and after James got sick and found that he had this heart condition and had a heart transplant, which was just terrific. I remember we visited him one time, and I don't know what hospital he was in. He was in a wheelchair, I know, and he was waiting hoping a donor would come up real soon. And it was shortly after we had visited him that a donor did come up. She was a young girl that was in a car accident. And I remember Jim telling me, and he always brought tears to his eyes. He wanted so badly to find out who her parents was, but at that time they didn't like to give that information. But I think finagling around, Jim did find out who her parents were, right, Tom? And I remember when he got in contact with him, he told me that was one of the biggest thrills of his life, to know that he had part of their daughter's body with him. And he used to go around and give talks about his heart condition. And one time he was in Rochester and he invited myself, Mary Nunamaker, and Lola Cook to attend. Mary Nunamaker did the driving. We went to Rochester, and I think I cried through part of it. I don't know how Jim could have gotten through it like he did, but he did. And Lola Cook was almost a second mother to John and Jim. They lived close, and Lola's son, Marshall Cook, and John and Jim were all like brothers. And so he always called, and that night he was talking in Rochester. He said, before I get involved, I want to introduce my second mother, Lola Cook, and my two cousins that are with me. So we did enjoy that very much. And we had a nice luncheon afterwards.
It didn't seem like Jim and John got along real good.
Maybe in their younger years, but as they got older, they got and both had families. I think that drew them closer together.
What
Yes.
was it early on? John just says they were just different people.
They were, and of course John had a family before Jim, and they had. I think John had 8 children, he and his wife, and I believe the youngest one died as an infant. Otherwise, I think he had 7 children.
I don't think it's that many, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay.
He had quite a family. And then he had his oldest son died from a heart condition. I think he had gotten home from practicing some game or something at school.
I think.
Yes, I think that's what happened.
He was very close to me in age.
Was he? Yes. How old are you, Tom?
39, a couple days ago.
You're so young.
Well, I guess, next to you, Agnes. I hope I can be this sprite at 83.
Oh, well, I'm grateful for the health I've had and being able to live this long to enjoy my grandchildren and have 5 great-grandchildren.
Well, what else can we say about Jim and John Feehan?
Well,
Were they good boys? Well, didn't Jim?
well,
be a
John
little mischievous?
loved to party. And I know that because he was around here. And he loved, and it didn't matter to John what age group he was in. If they were going to party and they invited him, he was such a good sport. And he's just a great guy. I think the world of John. He comes and has coffee with me quite often after daily masses. I invite him down, and I don't think he ever refuses. So,
I would guess Jim to be the partier of those two.
well, maybe he was, but you see, he was never in this area close enough for me to really know about that.
Okay.
After he got through college and got to be up in business and all, then I never got in touch with Jim. It's only when he would stop, when he'd be in Plainview.
It was
Yeah.
pretty rare.
Well, he used to make it quite often. Then once in a while, he'd call John and they'd come together. They loved that. They loved to come together. So I guess that I was the one in the different families that was closer to John and Jim because of knowing the background of their life.
So we don't know what Dennis or my grandpa John did for work, other than it was kind of not anything specific.
Well, John, later years, in fact, he retired from working at the dairy in Rochester. He worked there for...
No, not Uncle John, to me. My grandpa.
Oh, Grandpa John. No, I think that he worked mostly at whatever job was available. Mm-hmm. Yes, in those days. That was Depression years and was hard.
9 kids, I mean.
Yes, yes.
No, he didn't.
No, he didn't. No, he just had...
2 boys.
Yes, John and James. But his sisters made up, I guess, for the big families, especially Aunt Roni and Mother.
Uh-huh. So, is this Cook lady, she's passed away?
Yes, I'd say it'd be about 5 years now.
She would know a lot about.
She would have really been able to tell us if she'd have been here.
And how was Frances not around, or they just hung out over at the Cooks, or?
They went back and forth to each other's houses all the time. Yeah, they were friends all through school and all of that. They were very close knitted.
Marshall still around?
No, he died about 3 years ago. I see his wife quite often at daily mass. Yeah. I think they go and call on her once in a while. John does once in a while. Yeah.
Huh, I know I'm going to think of things when I go here.
Yes, that you'd like to.
Yeah, but I can come back.